Welcome to Easy Chess and this compilation of tricks, tactics, and strategies for using your bishops more effectively. Although the bishop is less powerful than a queen or rook, it is far more subtle and hard to understand, which is why mastery of this piece is one of the main ways to reach a rating of 2000 or higher. This guide is divided into 17 sections with a total of 60 videos, and you can skip to any section or video by clicking on the progress bar at the bottom. So, without further ado, let's get down to business. In this first section, we will look at one of the main attacks that a bishop can do, which is the pin. This first video shows the simplest of pins. The knight is attacked by the bishop with an absolute pin. This means it cannot move at all. Black fails to protect it, and there is an easy move with the pawn attacking the knight a second time and collecting a valuable piece. Moving on to the second video, we have a more complex diagonal pin from the Benko Gambit. This time, the queen is behind the knight, and the move knight e4 creates a double attack with the knight and bishop. The white knight will be lost, leaving black in a very good position. In video 3, we again have a bishop pinning a knight, and behind it is a valuable queen. White has also managed to open the f-file, and this adds a rook to the attack. White adds a knight to the attack, but black uses their second knight as a defender. Nevertheless, there are still not enough defenders and black is likely to double their pawns in front of their king. The best move from here is actually a rook sacrifice, which will leave black in a very dangerous position. The queen moves forward, allowing the spare white rook to come to f1 on the next move. Black can play pawn g5 to block the bishop, but that will mean the knight can be taken. Alternatively, black could play pawn c6, but white can now take the knight and double pawns. From here, queen to h5, and there is a very good chance of checkmate. In this next situation, we can see a line of the French defense advance variation where black has pushed their pawns forward. White plays knight to g5 and will be able to grab the h7 pawn on the next move. Black will usually play pawn h6, which in theory can kick the knight back, but white has the clever move queen to h5. Black cannot take the knight without losing their rook, and the queen threatens checkmate. Black defends the f7 square with the queen, but white can just go ahead and collect the pawn with their knight. And if the queen captures, we will finally see the bishop pin and the black queen is captured. In the fifth video, we have another position from the French defense. Bishop to e3 attacks the queen. If the queen takes the b2 corner pawn, it is actually very good for white, but we won't look at that today. If black blocks the attack with their dark bishop, white can play knight a4. This is a fork and an X-ray attack, and the black bishop will be lost. Instead, there is a more obvious move that black can try, and that is pawn to d4. This really does look like a great fork at first sight, and many people will play it. But we will take the pawn with the knight, and when their knight takes, it seems like they have one apiece. However, white has the excellent move queen to g4. All of a sudden, there is an extra attacker on the knight, and white will win the piece back. And even better for white is the chance to take the g7 pawn. The sixth video shows a pin that is a bit tougher to spot. Please pause now if you would like a challenge. So, the move is bishop to h6. The pawn is pinned because the white bishop is unprotected. Black will of course play g3, but white can capture twice on e5. This is based on the fact that any movement of the f4 pawn will give up a bishop to black and create a real problem. In section 2, we will look at how to defend against bishop pins and punish errors effectively. The seventh video shows a common way of collecting a free pawn at lower levels. If a knight is already protected by a bishop, then your opponent should probably not attempt a pin. In this position, black can easily grab the e5 pawn with their knight and gain a clear advantage. At the 2000 rating level, this is usually enough to win the game. Now on to video 8, and let's look at a typical Caro-Kann position. Players are often desperate to get their light-squared bishop out before closing their pawn chain. But the move bishop to g4 is a mistake. White can sacrifice their bishop on f7, and when the king takes, there's knight to e5 check, allowing white to win back their material. The enemy king cannot castle and must retreat to either e8 or g8. If you play the old Benoni against d4, you can sometimes get much the same trick with reverse colors. Bishop to g5 is no good, and we will sack our bishop on f2 to draw out the king. Furthermore, if the enemy king ends up on g1, it's actually just one move away from checkmate, with queen to e3. This tactic is especially good in blitz. Next, let's look at a position from the Norwegian defense. White has pinned the knight, with the idea of pawn d5 next, but this is a big mistake. We have the classic move queen a5 check, and will win the bishop. Notice there is no knight that would usually save white here. In section 3, let's look at ways of using bishop forks. In this first video, we see a Benko gambit position where white plays pawn to f4 to kick the bishop. Please pause and choose the best move. Okay, so I hope you found the move rook takes b2. The queen must recapture, and then we can finally play our very nice bishop fork. Black wins a knight, and will soon pick up a rook as well. Now let's look at a position from the accelerated dragon, where white has gotten sloppy and has not yet castled. Black's rook attacks the b2 pawn, so white defends it with their own rook. But from here, black can just take that pawn anyway. The rook is lost, but black has the very useful capture of a knight on c3, with a fork on the rook at the same time. This is great for black. The fork on e7 is a very useful tactic if you open with pawn d4. Black has attacked with their long bishop and queen, but the d6 pawn is a hanging pawn. The e7 fork attacks the rook, and if black tries to save it, then the bishop can step in and ruin black's pawn structure. Finally, let's look at this Koltanowski gambit, aka Deutz gambit. White begins the attack with the surprising move rook takes f4. When black takes the rook, our queen will grab the knight on d4, and suddenly, a very dangerous bishop pin is revealed. Black might still be able to castle here, but they're still very close to being checkmated. Their queen moves, but then bishop h8, and unfortunately for black, they can't move their e7 pawn either. In section 4, we will look at probably the two most common bishop attacks by white on the enemy king. First up, the h7 square. The light bishop and queen threaten checkmate, but only if the knight can be removed. Black will lose very quickly unless they play rook e8 to create an escape square. White should next play bishop g5 to add an attacker. From here, pawn to h6 is actually a big mistake. We will just sacrifice the bishop and get the queen to h6. As you can see, the amount of pressure on the h7 square is huge, and checkmate is extremely likely. The other square we can attack is the g7 square. Here, with our queen on the g-file, the move bishop h6 is always played. It threatens checkmate, and black must play g6. Many players will instantly grab the black rook, but sometimes it is best to just wait and look for something better. And here, queen f4 creates an even bigger threat. In section 5, let's look at discovered attacks. Let's start with something very easy. It's the revenge check. Rook h1 looks like a back rank mate, but because of our bishop, we get a revenge check and win the rook. This will only ever happen in blitz or at low levels. In this next position, white can get a discovered attack in the center of the board. First, White will sack their knight on f7. If the king captures, then we play bishop takes g6, and because it comes with check, white will win a queen and win the game. Next, in this Icelandic gambit for black, white can see that a discovered attack is coming, so they play bishop e2. But black can go ahead and grab the c4 pawn anyway. The bishop is pinned and cannot move, and black gains a slight advantage. Now let's look at a position from the Lasker done attack, where white plays a Fianchetto. Black plays knight f6, but this is a real mistake. Pawn e5 activates the bishop and attacks two pieces at the same time, and black will lose from here. In this next position, white has castled long, and here you can often get a discovered attack on the enemy queen. First, white trades off the knights, and after that there is bishop takes h6, which damages the defenses of the enemy king. In section 6, we will show the two most common bishop batteries. First up, we have a battery with a queen behind a bishop. Black has played the Philidor defense against the bishop's opening. After the move d4 and pawn takes, white can offer up a second pawn. This pawn move has two purposes. It attacks d4, but it also allows white to create a queen and bishop battery. The worst move for black is bishop to e7, and white goes ahead with the battery. f7 is attacked, and there is no point in playing knight to h6. Black is losing. Going back, black could instead take the pawn on c3. White again sets up the battery, and this time black makes another error with bishop to e6. White will trade bishops on e6, and can then grab the e6 pawn with check. But an even better move here is queen takes b7. So here, any strong player needs to play queen to e7 to protect the weak square and keep the game balanced. Note also that queen to d7 is not good for black, as it blocks their bishop. Moving on, and we have the powerful bishop and queen battery. Here, black wants to set up their own Fianchetto, but it is a blunder. First, white will remove the knight that protects h7. Once black retakes, we play queen to e4. This is the lethal bishop plus queen battery. Checkmate is coming, so black might play g6, and the queen will collect the rook. A slightly better move for black is bishop f5, but white will still gain material. So all in all, we can see how useful that light square bishop is, and as white, we should never let black take it with their knight. Let's now look at a very common maneuver called the knight attack. This is when a knight attacks the f7 or c7 squares and is supported by a bishop. And of course, it works just as well with the black pieces on the opposite side. It is a great attack because this knight can usually fork a rook and queen, or a rook and king. The most famous use of this tactic is in the fried liver attack. Black has moved both their knights out, and white has put their bishop on c4. We next play knight to g5, threatening f7, so black must play pawn to d5 to block. The mistake by black here is when their knight takes on d5. White sacrifices their knight on f7, calling out the black king. After the move queen to f3, it's usually very hard for black to survive this position. Let's now look at a knight attack with the black pieces. I always play the old Benoni against the queen's pawn opening. Taking c5 is unwise by white. After e6, white plays the aggressive move pawn e4, and black develops their dark bishop. We then see knight f3 and knight f6, and finally the move pawn e5. This foolish move by white basically forces black to play the knight attack. White will be in trouble whatever they play. For example, if they play bishop to e3, we trade off the bishop and capture a pawn, and black will also struggle to get castled. In this next video, let's look at black playing the Norwegian Gambit. The black knight sits in the middle of the board with a good position. If white gets sloppy and simply attacks the knight, then black has bishop f5. This attacks the queen and sets up the knight attack at the exact same moment. Black is very likely to win from here. Next up, and since I love the bishop's opening, I quite often face the Philidor counterattack by black. White has played e5, and black decided to take the pawn, but we can next play knight takes e5, and the knight attack is imminent. Black is in trouble, and the move bishop to e6 is a common reply. Surprisingly, the best move here is actually knight takes f7. The bishop on e6 cannot move as it is pinned, and the queen can take it on the next move. You might have noticed that I love this von Hennig gambit against the Caro-Kann defense. In this advanced position, the black bishop is on the f5 square. Amazingly, we can still attempt a knight attack here. After bishop to e7, simply grab the pawn and fork queen and rook. When the king takes, we play rook takes bishop, and there is a fantastic diagonal pin on the king. Going back, and in this same position, you might also want to try sacking your rook first. Black will be compelled to take the piece, and this time you have the knight attack on f7, and we will capture the corner rook. Just a quick message. If you like this content, please subscribe, like the video, or leave a comment, and it will help the channel to grow. Thanks very much. In Section 8, we will look at the power of a Fianchettoed bishop. A Fianchetto is when you put a bishop on a long diagonal, and as you probably already know, it is extremely effective and useful for counterattacks. This move is most often played by black, but some openings by white also use it. Probably the most famous Fianchetto opening for black is the Sicilian dragon variation. In this position, black has sacrificed material but still has a very good position with an attack on a bishop. It is white to play, and if they move their bishop to b4, they will lose their queen. Instead, they might try bishop to e3, which actually protects their queen, but black has the very clever move knight to d5. The idea of this move is to activate the long bishop. White can't just take the knight with the pawn, or black will sacrifice a rook with check. Taking the rook will lead directly to checkmate, but moving the king isn't much better. Bishop takes c3, and the game will be over very soon. Let's go back a step. We can see that the white knight might also capture black's knight, but this move leads to an immediate rook check. When the king shifts, black can actually sacrifice the rook on b1, dragging the king back to a dangerous square where it has no escape. Now, what if white spots the danger and tries to sidestep it by moving the king early? Black simply captures on b2, and the king is forced to take. Once again, the combined power of the bishop and queen comes crashing in, and checkmate is inevitable. Even if white ever did get a chance to counterattack, we can see how the long bishop is a solid defender too. A queen check on h8 is completely off the table, so the only option is a check on h7. The king calmly slides to f8, and we can see there's nowhere useful for the queen to go. You can also play a Fianchetto against d4 openings. Here we have the Benko gambit, and black has a rook on an open file. After white castles, this rook can go ahead and capture the white bishop. The queen will of course take, but after knight takes d5, the long bishop is active and the queen is skewered. The rook will be captured, and black has a nice advantage from here. We know that a Fianchetto is a very powerful resource, so the following section will look at how to attack them. The most famous way to attack the Sicilian dragon is with the Yugoslav attack. White will set up a battery of the queen and dark bishop, and look to trade off the dark bishop on the h6 square. After that, they will perform a long castle and storm the g-pawn and h-pawn forward. This is a highly effective method and can be used against any Fianchetto defense. Against the Pirt's defense, white can use much the same method. It is known as the 150 attack. The main difference here is that black has pawns on c6 and b5, and they can move their queen to a5. The white king moves one square to guard the corner, and on the next move, white attempts to trade the dark bishops. In this next position, the dark bishops have already been traded. Black plays b4 to kick the knight. The knight retreats and black must decide what to do about the dangerous pawn on h5. If black does take the pawn, then white will instantly play g4 to offer up another pawn, since white wants to activate their rook as soon as possible. If black takes this next pawn, the queen can finally get to h6 with check. Going back, black may instead bypass the pawn. But white has a sneaky move, which is h6 check. If the king goes back, it is now stuck on an artificial back rank. It is also possible for black to just leave the pawn where it is and develop another piece. This example shows bishop to a6. But this move is not good for black. The pawn on h5 can take, and this activates the rook. Queen to h6 will follow, with check. The king escapes, and for now the h7 square is still safe. However, white will route their knight to h3 and then the g5 square, and aim to take on h7 and open up the h-file. In this next video, we will look at some of the structural flaws of a Fianchetto structure. If the enemy king can get pushed to the corner square by a knight check or some other check, then it becomes much more vulnerable. From here, white can simply play a rook check, and when the queen retakes, the bishop of black is badly placed. The bishop blocks, but it is an easy checkmate for white. Even if the king is placed on the safer second square, there are still some tricks that can be played. After a rook trade, the queen can get in with a back rank check. The bishop will block, but now the pawns can be pushed, and if black simply trades the pawns, then a second check from the rook can force the king to move, and checkmate will follow. Finally, let's look at a situation where white has a dark bishop of their own. They can sack the queen and still get a checkmate. Of course, you need to make sure that the black queen is out of the way first, like it is in this position. Bishop h6, and soon the rook and bishop checkmate will follow. This is known as Morphy's mate. In section 10, let's look at a key part of using a bishop, the bishop sacrifice. This first video shows possibly the fastest bishop sack in chess, which can occur in the Lewis gambit of the bishop's opening. After d4 and pawn takes d4, white can instantly sack their bishop on the f7 square. The black king takes, but then queen h5 will be played with check. White will get the material back, and the black king is unable to castle, which is a real bonus for white. In this next position, we see another version of the bishop's opening called Philidor counterattack. Once again, f7 is the square we will aim at. King is checked, and when it takes, we simply play queen c4 and get our material back. Next up, and we have a line from the Smith-Morra gambit. I am sure you can already guess what square the bishop will be sacrificed on. Taking the e5 pawn proves to be a fatal move in this position. And yes, once again, we can sack the bishop on f7. The black king is forced to capture, and in doing so, steps into danger. White will soon collect a free queen. Another common square for sacrificing the light-squared bishop is h7. This classic idea often arises in the French defense or in e6 variations of the Sicilian defense. In the position shown, black has castled too early, and crucially, there is no knight on f6 to defend. White captures the h7 pawn with the famous Greek gift sacrifice. After the king accepts this gift, knight g5 check follows, and the white queen springs into action. If the king retreats to g8, white can deliver a swift checkmate. If the king tries to escape to g6, it will come under immense pressure, and black is likely to hemorrhage material while attempting to protect it. In Section 11, we'll explore a couple of brilliant queen sacrifices that pave the way for a bishop to scoop up even more material. This position is from the von Poppel Gambit, and it looks like the black knight and bishop are putting huge pressure on the white knight on f3. But amazingly, the best move for white is to just take the enemy knight and give up their queen. Watch what happens after that. Black collects a queen, but bishop b5 check is a simple, devastating move. The black king must be protected, and white will give up a knight and queen to stop the attack. When the dust settles, white is one piece to the good. And you might be wondering what happens if black block the check with pawns? Well, the bishop is attacked, but white has the sneaky move pawn c7 with a discovered attack, and once again, the black queen is lost. Again, white is winning. You can get a very similar position if you play the Alapin defense against the Sicilian with pawn d6. White takes the knight and gives up the queen. Again, white can play bishop b5 check. Just as before, black has no answer to this attack. Count the minor pieces, and white has a 3-2 advantage. In Section 12, we take a look at a common advantage at higher levels of play, the bishop pair. In the first video, black is ahead by one pawn, but white has two bishops aiming directly at the enemy king. Amazingly, checkmate is guaranteed for white. White plays queen to f5, creating a threat of checkmate along the light squares. Black is forced to play pawn to g6. Then comes queen to f6, and now the mate threat switches to the dark squares. Another clever tactic the bishop pair enables is a rook nudge. In this position, white's bishop and knight are attacking the f7 square, but a black rook is defending it. White then plays knight to a3, attacking the rook with the second bishop. Black must now give up either the rook or the vital f7 pawn. In this case, black chooses rook to d8, but white gains a great attack on the king from the resulting position. There are situations where the bishop pair can be ineffective. In this position, the bishops are blocked by too many of their own pawns. These are often referred to as bad bishops. Meanwhile, black's knights are more versatile, able to hop around and find useful squares. From here, black can likely check the white king and gain a strong advantage. Next, we see an endgame position with far fewer pawns, often called an open position. In these types of positions, the two bishops come to life, with access to many key squares. The game here is finely balanced, and both sides have chances. Finally, let's look at an endgame where white has a space advantage thanks to advanced pawns. In this setting, the bishop pair becomes lethal. Bishop to f6 checks the king, forcing it backward. With the black king pushed back, the white king can march forward and take control of key squares. White is almost certain to win from this position. Next, let's look at two clever ways a bishop can deny castling rights to the enemy king. In the first position, white has been careless and hasn't castled. While the a-pawn looks free to march forward, bishop to a6 completely spoils white's plans. It not only blocks the pawn, but also prevents castling. Black now has the option to pressure either the exposed king or the isolated pawn, gaining a slight edge. Now for the classic Benko Gambit bishop trade, which often arises from the old Benoni defense against the queen's pawn opening. After white plays c4, black offers a pawn. If white accepts, a second pawn is sacrificed. If that too is taken, the light-squared bishop lines up for an early trade. Once white plays e4, the bishops are exchanged, leaving the white king stuck in the center. White typically resorts to artificial castling, losing time. Meanwhile, Black develops a strong setup with a Fianchettoed bishop and 2 rooks, along with a queen and 2 knights. All are focused on the queen side, and many tactical opportunities can be found in the corner of the board. The White king may not yet be under attack, but Black can often win in a different style. This next section looks at ways to trap and limit the power of enemy bishops. A common feature of long castling is that a king will be 1 extra square away from the edge, and a pawn will be unguarded. It looks like a bishop can take the pawns on the edge of the board, but these pawns are poison pawns. After the move pawn b6, the bishop is trapped and the king will capture it. However, if you have a second bishop or a well-placed queen, then all of a sudden we will be able to grab the poison pawn on the edge of the board. In fact, it puts the enemy king in huge danger, and if they try to capture it in the same way, they will lose to a bombardier's checkmate. Next up, and we can see that Black has 2 bishops in the center of the board. Whenever you see 2 minor pieces close to this many pawns, there is a great chance of trapping one of them. Pawn h3, and the bishop really should trade here. If it does not, White will trap a bishop with their pawns, as we can see in the continuation. Let's now look at a position from the Bowdler attack. Black plays bishop e3 and attacks an unguarded pawn. However, this is a big error, as we can see. The same rule applies. White has 3 minor pieces in the center, and Black has plenty of pawns, so a pawn storm is always a good idea. We can play pawn d5, then pawn d5 again, and finally pawn d4. We will collect a minor piece and most likely win the game. Another key idea of higher-level play is to make sure your opponent has a bad bishop. In this Caro-Kann position, the White bishop attacks f7. Black plays the move e6 to block the attack, but this pawn also blocks the light square bishop of Black. This bishop is inactive for quite a few moves, and is what chess players refer to as a bad bishop, or even a tall pawn. As a general rule, it is great if your opponent has a bad bishop that is blocked by pawns, and you should leave it that way for as long as you possibly can. Don't trade pawns and let them activate their bishop. In this video, we will look at a way to temporarily freeze a pawn structure. As we can see, Black has an extra knight, but with the move pawn e6, the pawn structure is frozen, and Black has a bad bishop. This will give White valuable time to activate their pieces and keep the 3 corner pieces out of action. In section 15, let's now look at some ideas for using bishops in the endgame. Here is a recent game I played as White. After bishop a6, there are 2 attackers on the c8 bishop. My opponent with Black plays queen to d6. Their idea here is to sacrifice the queen in d1, and when their rook retakes, they can get a back-rank checkmate. However, this is a common endgame mistake, because the bishop on a6 can still get back to f1, and a back-rank checkmate is not possible. With this in mind, I was free to play rook takes c8, and my opponent resigned. Here, we can see an important decision for Black, and if your opponent is sloppy or is low on time, they may push the wrong pawn here. If they play pawn b2, it is time for White to resign. However, if they play pawn a2, it is instead time for Black to resign. After the move bishop d4 check, the entire diagonal of Black squares is controlled by the bishop, and there is no way for the pawns to move forward. This is an important principle to remember. Don't put a pair of pawns on a light square diagonal if your opponent has a dark square bishop in play. Previously, I showed a game that I won, so let's now look at one that I lost. In this position, I felt pretty good with my king close to the passed pawn on e3, so I went ahead and took the f7 pawn, with tempo on their bishop. I was expecting bishop b6, but instead they played bishop c7. This is a clever move by my opponent, because my knight is actually now trapped. Their king can now go to g6 to capture on the next move. Just a quick message. If you like this content, please subscribe, like the video, or leave a comment. and it will help the channel to grow. Thanks very much. Section 16 will show some ways of using a bishop for obstruction. These tactics tend to be used in the endgame, but look out for them in the mid-game as well. In video 55, it looks like black has too many pawns, but in fact the key piece is actually the white pawn on c6. We start with c7, and the rook is compelled to go to c1. However, we then have bishop e6 check, and when the king moves, we have the nice obstruction move with bishop to c4. The rook now cannot get to the pawn, and white will gain a queen and win the game. Let's now look at a useful way of hooking a bishop onto a pawn. Both pieces will protect each other. This trick works best when a pawn is very advanced. Black has a big material advantage, but bishop e8 changes everything. If black leaves the bishop where it is, then white will promote the pawn to a queen. If instead the rook takes the bishop, the pawn can just retake. Either way, white will get a queen and almost certainly win the game from here. Finally, let's look at some of the more unusual openings in chess that rely on the power of a bishop. First up, the Owen's defense. It can start out looking like the French defense, but after b6, it is clear that black has other ideas. Bishop d3 is best for white. Then we will see bishop b7 and knight c3. After this, black can activate their dark bishop to the b4 square, pinning the knight and indirectly putting more pressure on the e4 pawn. From here, the ideal defense for white is a sideways knight move from the second knight to the e2 square. Black will then play knight f6, adding another attacker. It is important for white to castle here, and they have a good position. Next up, and let's look at an unusual opening for black. After e4, black responds with g6, the modern defense. d4 is the most common continuation, and black plays knight f6. e5 leads to the Norwegian Gambit, but the most common move at the 2000 level is knight f3. Black plays d5, and white should not take. Instead, they will play e5, and white plays knight e4. The knights are usually traded, and with a pawn on e4, white may play e3. Black plays e5 to disrupt the pawn chain. Both sides will advance knights to attack the d4 square. Then we see bishop e3 and bishop g7. After knight g3, we see pawn taking on d4. This is a real battle for the dark squares. The Nimzo-Larsen is a rare attack with b3 by white, then e5 by black. Next, white fianchettos and black plays knight e6. After pawn e3, black can play d5. We then see bishop b5, which pins the knight and gives the other bishop a chance to take the e5 pawn. From here, I actually recommend knight e7, which is a very effective gambit called the LCO. The majority of Nimzo-Larsen players have no idea how to deal with it, but we will have to cover it in another video. Last of all, we have the wild and crazy Grob opening. White opens with the surprising move g4. Black often plays d5 and attacks the pawn with bishop. This is what white wants, and they continue with bishop g2. Bishop takes g4 next, but white will respond with pawn c4. Black cannot just take this pawn, or they will lose b7 and their rook. Instead, the move c6 is usually played. But then white has queen b3, attacking d5 and b7 at exactly the same time. After knight f6, the queen can get into the corner, and although the position is still equal, the Grob player will have a position that they planned for. Here's a tip. If you are unsure of this Grob opening, you can instead play e5 and develop normally, or instead you could play c5 and try a version of the Dragon Sicilian. In both cases, white really has no advantage at all. Thanks very much indeed for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, hit the like button, or leave a comment. We will have more videos like this in the future, and feel free to look me up on chess.com. If you are around 1900 to 2100 rating, you will be an ideal opponent for me.